Thank you all for joining us. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Welcome to In Time. So tonight we have on what I think is going to be an excellent show. I think it really sort of is the epitome of what it is that we like to do, think about, and talk about on this show, the importance of critical thinking. So we're going to bring out our guest, Dr. Todd Miller, in just a minute. Before we do, I wanted to let everyone know that tomorrow we are going to be doing our rundown on overtime. It's actually going to be on the main channel, but it's going to be the overtime rundown. We're going to have on Joe with us, and we're going to cover what's been in the news for the last week, a few things with Trump. One of the biggies we're going to talk at least a bit about is the Delta variant. The Delta variant is not getting the attention that I think it deserves. I understand why. Dr. Todd may in fact be able to fill us in a bit on why, because I will tell you this. I was opining with my wife that I was just getting used to being able to hang out with people again when I was reaching the conclusion that just because I'm vaccinated doesn't mean that I can't be a asymptomatic vector, including for people like my youngest daughter who cannot get vaccinated. So it's a serious problem, and oh boy, I'd so much rather pretend it's not a real problem. That's not what we do. So we are going to be covering, so what we're going to do is we have a special show coming up on Thursday. We are going to be covering COVID, the Delta variant, exactly what we know about it, why we are so concerned about it, what it means for the future of trying to deal with COVID, and where we're going to go from here. And I think we're going to try to have as sober a look on the issue as possible. Friday, we are going to be doing our regular call-in show. That was great last week. I really enjoyed doing it. Neil came in, Neil604 came in, bombed us, failed. He said something about, friends, family, caring, people he cared about. I don't know, but, All right, so, and I understand why the sound is an issue. Thank you for that. I made one correction to it, and I'll fix it completely in just a second. I do apologize. Let me just, if I can get a notification there, Titan. I assume, though, you guys were at least able to make out the words I was using. One of these days I'll remember to switch to the right microphone. Yeah, I'm going to assume that that's now correct, and I'm on the right mic. Apologies for that one. I guess I'm still the $400 muter. At any rate, as I was saying, we're going to do our call-in show on Friday, and I think looking forward to that, but it's 4 shows this week, and that's assuming we don't have any breaking news, so all right, so assuming we're not having any other technical difficulties, which is one hell of an assumption, but I think I'll go with it for now. Our guest tonight, Dr. Todd Miller, who has written a book on the importance of critical thought, and we should have a link to it in the description right now. He was recently on Neil604, where I managed to drop in myself and give him a hard time, because that's what I'm all about. And really liked the guy. I liked what he had to say, so we decided to bring him on, and he was gracious enough to join us. So without any further ado, please let me introduce Dr. Todd Miller. Dr. Miller, how are you?
I'm doing just great, and I really appreciate this opportunity, Nick.
Oh, my pleasure. It was, I'll tell you, and we have one of our guest hosts, Mowdy, who, I had talked to him. I actually confused you for someone else that had actually recently written a book on, wrong mic, Nick, thanks, Mowdy, and it seems like there's a couple of books coming out on critical thought, and I think there's probably some sociological reasons why people are suddenly thinking about that. Trump! Sorry. Oh, my God. But all that aside, and I think one of the things that sort of hooked me, and I know will hook a number of people listening to this, and it's probably for the end, but I'll give this part away earlier, which was when talking about cognitive biases. Somebody had said, well, gee, you're better at identifying them. You must be basically immune to them and overcome them reasonably easily. What was your response to that?
That just because you know about cognitive biases that you're incapable of having them? Is that what you're asking?
Well, that was what somebody had asked you, at least. Not that you were incapable of having them, but they weren't really a problem for you now that you knew what they were and were an expert on them.
Oh, no, they are a daily problem for me. They are a daily problem for every human on the planet that has ever lived. And that's the problem, is that everybody has biases, whether they want to admit it or not. But even when you learn about the cognitive biases and the logical fallacies, what you find is that you're still thinking in that mode quite often of the time. Now, hopefully, you can get well versed enough in them to recognize them both in yourself when you think them, and also the people that you're listening to in the media, or your friends or your family. It's not just because that you learn the cure that you can't catch the disease. The problem is that, humans are humans. They've inherited a human brain through evolution. And the problem with evolution is that it does not necessarily end in perfect forms. Just because we may have arguably the most evolved brain that we know of does not mean it's a perfect thinking machine. When it's used critically, when the thinking is used critically, then you can attain things like computer science, rockets, medicine, music, art, architecture, navigation, whatever you want. But when it's not used critically is where you tend to find the problems that plague us to this day. And whatever it's politics, war, biases against religion, against racism, or causing racism, causing misogyny, whatever it might be, all tend to be products of a very imperfectly evolved brain. But of course, when you're the owner of the brain, the last thing you want to think of is that it's not perfect. You want to believe that it's reliable.
There was a comedian in your book that you quoted. You have a number of quotes, but there was a comedian you had quoted who said...
Emo Phillips.
Yeah. What was the quote?
It was that I used to think that my brain was the most wonderful organ in my body, and then I realized what was telling me this.
Yeah. Oh dear Lord. Well,
that was a funny line, but I mean the depth to it is amazing. I don't know if he meant it to that depth.
I highly
doubt it.
That
explains a hell of a lot.
I highly doubt it, but I really do. I thought there are a number of quotes in that book, and that was one of the ones that I really liked far most. The other thing, and we got a super chat, and I'd like to deal with that in a second, but the other thing that I thought is interesting, and I'd like to point this out because you just mentioned this, is we do like to think of ourselves as perfect in one way or another. Now, I have this discussion with people all the time, which is they'll talk about perfect vision, right? And they'll say, well, you have perfect vision. Well, when doctors talk about perfect vision, what they mean is you're average. You're perfect for the norm, what's expected. But eagles have better vision than we do, so then what's better than perfect? And so we think of the perfect human brain, right, which is somebody who never gets sick, never suffers depression, never really makes any serious mistakes. If they do, it's because they're tired, this and that, when really, first of all, the physical body isn't perfect. Everybody has ailments of some kind. No, there isn't, and we're very much aware that there is no perfect physical specimen, and yet we assume almost everybody has a perfect brain in some way or another. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, again, we're biased that way. What else are we going to go by? Are we going to go by a dog's brain and thinking? Are we going to go by a hamster's or a dolphin's? We say, well, no, we're here on Earth. We have to deal with our Earth and other humans on human terms. So, well, what have I got to work with? Well, I guess I got my own brain, and maybe it's as good as anybody else's. And who am I going to rely on? Am I going to do my own thinking, or I'm going to go by what somebody else does the thinking for me? And so most people tend to think, I really don't think my brain would let me down. I don't think my brain would fool me. But then, and that's the way I was. That's how I kind of came to write the book. Was I was born like everybody else, an atheist. I thought, hey, that made me smarter than everybody because I wasn't believing in silly supernatural beliefs. But I never thought about it. I never even questioned myself about why I was an atheist. It was strictly a position of default by what I was born as. And I was lucky enough not to be indoctrinated by any parents into any religious belief. And so, but I was kind of smug about it. I thought, gee, I must be smarter than these people. Then I got some formal education. I say, gee, I'm getting smarter. And there must be no way that my brain could fool me because I know so much. Well, one day when I was on Facebook, I saw a link to something called a list of hidden persuaders. And to me, that sounded like it was referring to subliminal advertising, which I love examples of subliminal advertising, both in logos and in ads and commercials and such. And I clicked on it, but I was disappointed to find out that wasn't what it was about at all. It took me to a link in the Skeptic's Dictionary, and it was a list of cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And it was entitled A List of Hidden Persuaders. So what's hidden about this, and who's getting persuaded? So I started reading some of the entries, and it was talking about things like ad hoc explanations, cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, file drawer effect, Dunning-Kruger effect. And after I read about 6 of these, I started getting a very sick feeling in my stomach because I was recognizing myself in almost every single one of these. And I was depressed about it for months because I said, no, wait a second, I'm too smart. I've been educated too much. I'm beyond what the common people would think. And it was very humbling to realize my brain's no better than anyone else's. It's wired by evolution just like everybody else's is. And so your original question about once you know about these cognitive biases and logical fallacies, does that make you immune to them? No. I've got just as many biases as I've had in my previous 57 years, but I have to fight against them every day. Some of the biases are true, like, my bias towards gravity. I really think gravity is something that I could rely on, but I'm biased to that because that's been my life experience. Maybe someday gravity won't work in some situation. But for another example, I have a bias. I was raised in a lily white suburban neighborhood in North Texas in the 60s. And the norm at that time was whites married whites, blacks married blacks, Hispanics married Hispanics, yada, yada. And that's what was simply normal for me. And then that became my bias. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just that that's what I'm used to. It's my inclination. It's my tendency to see that. To this day, if I see an interracial couple, I have a moment's hesitation. I don't think that it's wrong. I just think to myself, I'm not used to that. That's not what I was raised in. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's what I'm not used to. Now, luckily, that moment fades very quickly, and almost immediately, I'm very happy for that couple. I said, wow, you guys found love. That's amazing. And you're so much more superior to me in that hopefully, paying attention to the race didn't enter into the equation at all. But regardless of whether I know about my bias, does not mean it goes away. There may be something about a hardwiring in my brain, the way the neurons were forming as I was growing. All my experiences, the things that I was used to became ingrained into what seemed like what was the norm for me, what was I don't want to use the word natural, but it's just what was a day-to-day experience.
Normative at a minimum, yeah, normative.
Exactly. But again, it doesn't make it right or wrong. There's biases that are obviously right, some obviously wrong. Some you have to look in the gray areas. The question is, are you questioning them? If I never questioned my bias, I'd probably become prejudiced against interracial couples. Maybe I would even discriminate against them with voting or something like that. But luckily, I was able to use enough critical thinking and question my bias, and I've so far been able to overcome it. And hopefully I'll always be able to overcome it, but I have to overcome it on a daily basis. It's sad. It's a sad admission for me. It doesn't mean that I'm, against it. It's just what I'm not used to, and it's how my brain is wired. So I even have a illustration in my book that shows what I consider the difference between just a bias, and when you don't question the bias, it can become a prejudice. And if you don't question, or if you act on the prejudice, it could become actual discrimination. So again, I have as many biases as anybody else out there. I simply try to defeat it on a daily basis using critical thinking.
You started talking about gravity, and my first thought was, okay, Ooh, we should hit you with Hume's problem of induction. Really want to blow your mind. None of the assumptions you make you can justify, but we'll save that for another time, since the audience has heard probably way too much about Hume's problem of induction. $2 super chat from the Sinister Porpoise. Computer science is a useless field, which actually the electron, when it was first discovered, was thought to be utterly useless, and all research going into it was thought to be a complete and utter waste of time. This is the electron which powers this conversation, among other things. So, yeah. Thank you, Sinister, for your support.
Sounds like a human bias.
Yeah, it does. Well, Porpoise also asked, "What's wrong with a dolphin brain?" Bad porpoise, no biscuit. Porpoise just, she's a troublemaker. She's all right. So, but this got me actually interested. I still want to cover. I still haven't even really gotten to where I was going to go in the intro, but I take that as a good sign that we're hitting a lot of interesting stuff. You had said something that I thought was really interesting, which is, I know that what I'm doing is an issue, and yet my brain is still also telling me this other thing. It's telling you two different things, and you dedicated essentially an entire chapter in your book to the fact that your brain can tell you it's one organ, and it's telling you two different things at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know if you're alluding to one of the very few illustrations I have in this volume. There'll be much more in the next edition. But it's the simple arrow illusion, where there's two horizontal lines. One's got arrowheads on each one. The other one has arrow tails on the other one. And the question is, which of the lines is longer? And most people say, well, the one with the arrow tails on it looks longer. But they kind of realize, well, I see what they're doing. They're trying to trick me because the two horizontal lines are identical in length. But for some reason, putting arrowheads on one and arrow tails on the other fools your brain. And of course, you can look at this illusion every day, every year, for decades, and your brain will still be fooled into thinking that one of them looks longer than the other, when a different part of your brain realizes that they're not. So here you have the simplest example I could come up with and fit into a book of how easy this supposedly amazing brain can be fooled. I mean, it's ridiculously easy to fool it, and in this particular case, it won't learn. That part of your brain will not learn that it's an illusion. It stays that way for decades. Yes, you can overcome it, but it's humbling when you realize how easy it is for our brains to be fooled.
So this is what I'm going to do right now is, sorry, the only way to put it up is to cover you. So there we go. This is the one. This is the one you're talking about. And then there's another one.
Exactly right. So you can see.
Yeah. Please.
Well, I was also going to say, one of the things I love, because I trained as a magician as a teenager, and I love trying to watch magicians and figure out how they do it, because I have a little bit of background about what they're trying to do. That's a wonderful illusion. And I love watching the shows where they show how master illusionists do their illusions. And I'll watch an illusion, and I'll be wowed. I'll say, holy cow, how do they do that? I don't see how they misdirected me. I said, that's an amazing illusion. My brain was, it was convinced. And then, of course, they show how it was done. Every single time, it is laughably easy. The magician knows how to exploit the limitations of the brain. It knows what the biases are. It says, okay, well, I know that the audience thinks that two horizontal lines with different converging lines can easily fool them. I could probably put that into an illusion and make them think that the bottom part of this thing is wider or skinnier than it's supposed to be. They'll never believe that somebody's actually able to hide down in there. And so, but again, no matter how many times I watch this, and when I think I know what to look for, each time I'm doing a facepalm saying, I can't believe I was fooled again. But that's the key phrase. I can't believe that I was fooled by my own brain. And that's what most people, think is, I don't think I could be fooled. No, I think I'm too sharp. I think I'm just too with it and stuff like that. And of course, we know where that gets us in today's society. I don't mention politics or anything like that, but people say, no, my side is right. Your side is wrong. You're the one who's been fooled. And of course, their opposition's thinking of the exact same thing. No, we're the ones who are right. you're wrong. And it gets into this kind of head-to-head talking heads shouting match, which can be very entertaining, which is what most talking head shows want, is something entertaining, so they get viewers and they get sponsors. But is any actual progress being made? Is anyone reaching across the aisle? Are any concessions being made? Is anybody trying to even see the other person's viewpoint? And the short answer is no, everybody's pretty much comfortable with what their brain is already telling them. And if they're given something that gives them a feeling of cognitive dissonance, it's like, you hold this position, let me show you this very obvious evidence where it's wrong. They're going to feel that discomfort of cognitive dissonance, but to save face or just to reconcile it in their own brain and find some kind of comfort, they're still going to probably keep towing the line of their own position.
Wow. Mowdy likes to say I'm made of questions, and I'm thinking of about 20 different places I'd love to go with this. So
bring them on. Bring them on.
One I would like to do before we go any further is I brought up this one. This one I found interesting because you had mentioned this, and I used to do this. I used to teach computer science at the high school level, and I actually had this illusion right here as people would walk in, and what has this got to do with computer science? And it's interesting because I think you actually, when you get into concepts of free will, which actually computer science has some interesting, I've got the degree in philosophy, so I think about this, and I was like, you start to get into computer science, and you kind of have to question, computers can't generate a random number. There's a reason for that, and there's all sorts of, but what I liked about this one was the human eye cannot correctly see this image. Can't do it. Can't be done. And the reason for that is, as you had mentioned in your book, where the retina attaches to the back of the eye, there is a blind spot, and so our eye fills it in, so we don't even know it's there. But in images that are correct, that are constructed in a certain way, they can take advantage of this blind spot, and you cannot actually see it correctly. Now, this image, I hate to do this on a computer or in a stream because this would be easy to fool. This would be easy to trick. I could just have an animated GIF. And it is pronounced GIF. Anyone who says it's pronounced GIF is obviously biased and is no longer welcome on the channel. But this could easily be animated. It's not. It's a JPEG. And you can find this JPEG very easily online, and you can see that it is in fact a JPEG. I guess I can't demonstrate it per se, so I can't. So you'll just have to take my word for it. But you can't see it without seeing motion, and that's because of a fault in the human eye. So, anyways, I wanted to bring that one up because you actually mentioned that precise example.
Well, yeah, and I mean this is interesting because, as you mentioned, you're showing me a still image. My brain, my eyes and my brain together are fooling me, thinking that it's moving. Now, before the show went on, you kind of said, I might ask you, what's the importance of truth? And I was thinking, okay, well, how would I answer that? I say, well, what's your alternative? If you don't have truth, then you have non-truth. Truth to me is just kind of like reality. So if you don't want reality, what do you have? Well, what's not real? And what do you think you're going to function better with? And so here's a beautiful example of how the eyes and the brain are easily fooled. And, most people enjoy these optical illusions. They're wowed by them. And then they kind of throw them by the wayside and say, okay, well, that was interesting. Now I'm off to my next thing. But they don't realize this optical illusion is a wonderful example of a highly sophisticated brain being fooled. They think, I think I know what reality is. The reality seems like that thing's moving. And they start saying, well, my brain saw it, and all these other people say that they're seeing it too, so it must be real. And again, you kind of start to see how groups of people can seemingly see something that's not real, but their pattern-seeking brain is trying to make sense of it. And of course, what the pattern-seeking brain does is it filters all the incoming data through their biases. What would I like to believe? Would I like to believe that that's moving or that it's still? And most people say, well, it seems to be moving. I guess I'll go with that bias. And then it tends to use a lot of logical fallacies to bolster it. Well, everybody else is seeing it. Well, that's the argument from popularity. It holds no validity. It doesn't make any difference how many people believe something. That lends no weight to whether it's reality or not. But that's what frustrates me is that, again, people want to believe that their brains are so infallible that they can't be fooled, that they'll pass by an optical illusion like this and just say, well, that was interesting for 10 seconds. I'm going to go on with the rest of my life, but not stop and think, holy cow, my brain is just, I don't know what it's seeing. I don't know why it processes things in this way. And that's why I try to stay humble, that no matter how much experience I have or how much education I have, I'm just as easily to be fooled as anybody else who's watching this show. I'm no better than anybody else.
Christopher Monty asks, is critical thinking counterintuitive to how the brain is supposed to function? That is, predict for survival.
Is it counterintuitive?
Well,
is that the question?
Well, okay. It sounds. I'll take a stab at it. I guess the Nicholas Lamar make it overly verbose and keep talking until somebody shuts my mic off way of asking the question would be, if I'm correct, I'm not sure. So Monty we'll get the code breakers on that, Monty. Don't worry about it. So you said that you appeared to say, let me reframe that slightly, that we're just not very good critical thinkers, and that the brain really isn't designed to do critical thinking. Well, it seems to me that if we're the dominant species on the planet, we're pretty good critical thinkers, and we must be, kind of geared that way. So it seems to me counterintuitive that you are saying that that this isn't how we function. Isn't that necessarily how we function if we are where we are today? I hope that's kind of right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't mind making shit up about what he said or didn't say all the time. I just try not to do it in a way where it's so public and I can get caught.
Well, the way I would respond to that is when you use the word intuition, I mean, that's kind of a spongy word. Maybe if I could rephrase what they were saying, if I'm anywhere close, is it the default position of the human brain to be a critical thinking organ? Now, just to back up for a second, what do I mean by critical thinking? In my book, what I'm talking about is critiquing one's own thinking. They can always do it with somebody else as well, but they really need to do the homework first with themselves. Okay? Otherwise, again, you're just going to be, I say this, you say that, nothing's going to get done. You have to be humble enough to say, I may be being fooled right now. But again, if you use the word intuition, I would not say that it's intuitive to think that someone's always thinking, gee, my brain's probably fooling me right now. I think the vast majority of people, their default position is, I'm going to believe whatever my brain tells me. I mean, what else am I going to rely on? I've relied on it for maybe 20, 30, 40 years, however old you are. It's gotten me this far. I've been successful. I've created wonderful things. So it must work pretty well. And you kind of ask this in the question. It's like, yes, we can think critically. My point in the book, and I write it down here, is that it's not the default position of the brain. The default position of the brain is to go ahead and believe what it already thinks and feels. I look at the optical illusion here. My first thought is, what seems to be moving? Everybody else that you talked about says that seems to be moving. Well, why wouldn't I go with that? Well, if I think, okay, I know enough that my brain isn't perfect, maybe it's fooling me somehow. Can I explain this some other way? You mentioned the blind spot and how the eye interprets these things. And so that would be my response, is that, yes, we can create wonderful music, rocket science, medicine, symphonies with the critical thinking part of our brain. We do that maybe 10 or 15% of the time, but the other 85 to 90% of the time, we use what I use in the book, heuristics, little rules of thumb, little shortcuts, little knee-jerk reactions. You say, I've taken this way to work, every day for 20 years. I don't even have to think about it anymore. I just stay between the lines and make sure I don't go through the two red lights ahead of me. And you don't have to even think critically about, is gravity going to keep me on the ground any longer? Or is somebody going to smash into me? You just kind of say, my shortcut is just to kind of keep going forward the way I always have. Why waste any more gray matter, any more mental effort. When I've done this so many times, why would I ever question that? And my point in the book is you don't have to think critically 100% of the time. 85% of the time you can use heuristics. You can use these shortcuts and everything. You don't have to use a lot of brain power. The problem is people get so comfortable being successful using those shortcuts. They say, look, I use these shortcuts every day, and it feeds me. It feeds my family. We get to go on vacations. We have a good time. Why would I change anything about that? Why would I spend more mental effort? And then they start making decisions that start impacting other people by voting with these same knee-jerk reactions. I like this political party. I don't like that political party. I'm not even going to look up what their position is on the issues. I just know that we're the good guys. They're the bad guys. Nothing's going to get done. So I'm not saying that we haven't achieved amazing things. I use examples in my book about both ancient Egypt and the Middle Ages, how ancient Egypt for about 3,000 years did not like innovation. People would come up, hey, how about we try this thing called the wheel? And they say, no, we're not going to do that wheel. We've never done the wheel before. It's not what the river Nile gives us. All we have to do is bow to those gods. They'll keep giving us as much inundation and as much food as we could possibly want. And they look down on innovation. So for 3,000 years, hardly any of it innovation at all. In the Middle Ages, you were penalized for actually trying to do scientific research. He says, well, you're going against the natural order. You know, people are supposed to die. Why are you trying to find a cure to the plague when this is obviously what God wants? And so for another 1,500 years, we are kept behind without being able to think critically. So you add those two together, you get somewhere around 4,500 years where there was maybe some progress, obviously, but not a lot. And then you put that towards the 100 years of progress we've had from 1921, where we were still doing horse and buggy mostly, a few cars, and now to 2021, where we've been to the moon, we've got satellites doing amazing things, we've got cures for cancer coming up. In just 100 years, if you can think of if we had started that much earlier, 4,500 years ago, how much further would we already be ahead today? My imagination is just far too limited to imagine how much further beyond personal jet backpacks and flying cars we could be if we hadn't been slowed down by a lack of critical thought.
Well, and I mean, it's common for atheists and anti-theists to exclusively blame religion. And I'll note that you did mention gods in there, but it doesn't sound like you're blaming religion per se, and that religion seems to be more of an instrument of this. Is that? Am I putting words in your mouth there?
Oh yeah, no. There's plenty. There's been plenty of atheistic, non-critical thinkers. You don't necessarily have to be a member of the church or even a part of the ancient Egyptian clerisy to be the instigators of this. All you have to do is have power to squelch innovation and critical thought. As you probably know, most leaders don't like the populace to do a lot of thinking. It gets complicated. People start arguing and you can't get consensus on anything. So what they tend to do is take shortcuts and just say, well, I won't mention any candidates, but they say, I'm going to argue against this particular policy of immigration. I know that I've got a lot of constituents that are going to love hearing this, and they're going to vote for me, and they're going to vote for whatever legislation I want to pass on that without any discussion at all. All you're doing is appealing to people's biases. And so that's the frustrating thing for me. It's one of the reasons why I wrote the book is there is progress being made, but it's such a sawtooth pattern of a little bit of progress, then we get backsliding, progress backsliding. And the only way, the way I argue the way forward is to have any kind of debate if both sides can at least recognize that they have biases and that they use logical fallacies to bolster them. If they can somehow recognize that and put it aside, whatever is left over won't be biases, won't be fallacies, and might actually lead to some kind of progress. It's unlikely to happen anytime soon, but when people read the book and they recognize these biases and fallacies in themselves, they'll realize that they're probably as big a part of the problem as everybody else. I I tend to piss off just about everybody on any side of politics, religious belief, or whatever, because I don't make a stipulation. I don't say that just because you're a non-believer, you're smarter or that you're a better thinker. I know lots of non-believers that love crystals, and they believe in flat Earth, and they believe in Bigfoot. So the mere fact that someone tells me they're a non-believer doesn't cut any ice with me at all. I say, well, I don't care about your conclusion. How did you get to the conclusion? How did you figure this out? Or do you feel like you figured it out, or does it just appeal to you and it makes you comfortable? And you have enough friends that agree with you, and then you get into a echo chamber where you get your beliefs echoed back to you all day long, and you feel great about this. Again, the brain loves having its biases confirmed. It probably gets little squirts of endorphin or serotonin or whatever that make it feel great every time its beliefs are somehow validated by some other source, particularly if it's some kind of recognized authority. I hate the argument from authority. I always argue that a 4-year-old can disprove Stephen Hawking if the evidence is good enough, and if their epistemology is good enough. So again, I love Hawking and I love lots of other scientific authorities, but I don't give them a carte blanche. I don't say just because it came from your mouth that it's real. Maybe you're like Einstein and you made the biggest blunder of his life, putting in the cosmological constant just to satisfy his own bias that he didn't want the universe to expand.
And was correct.
Very few people, huh?
Well, and he was corrected by a Catholic priest. Oh dear Lord,
sure.
I can't.
Was it Lemaitre?
Lemaitre.
I'm butchering the name. Yeah. And again, I don't care if it's a religious person out arguing Einstein. Fantastic. I love your argument. But it just goes. I like to use that example in the book because it shows somebody who is inarguably a genius, who was an incredible critical thinker when he needed to be in his math and his physics, fooled himself. His brain fooled him. He says, well, we're getting some numbers in here, and people are wondering, is it an expanding universe? Is it a static universe? Is it a shrinking universe? I just kind of feel like I'd like it to be static. It would feel better that way. And he makes the cosmological constant. So again, this happens to everybody. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with how the brain is wired by evolution. It's a pattern-seeking machine. It's so easily fooled by perceived patterns that aren't there. Einstein was just fooled by a pattern he thought he wanted to see, and then of course Hubble and other people disproved him.
Well, I think it was Pinker who had said too that we naturally see things that aren't there, and it's natural to look up into the sky, very natural to look up into the sky and say that it is obvious that the sun is revolving around us. It's obvious. Mm-hmm. Anybody who decides they want to argue differently is a nut and is denying a very obvious reality when it doesn't take too long thinking about it to realize if that were true, or if we were going around it, would actually look identical. There would be no way to distinguish, and yet we are absolutely certain of one and not of the other until it's investigated further.
Yeah, and I use that specific example in the book, and it just goes to show you that, for centuries, either people were fooled to think that the sun went around the earth, or that they were comfortable with that. And for centuries, no progress was made that way. But they, like you say, they could be certain. They would tell you, absolutely, Nick, I'm certain about this, and so are all these other people. So we're so certain that it must be true. And of course, you find out after several centuries, no, you were fooled the whole time. It didn't make any difference how certain you were. Certainty has no business in critical thought. And of course, I use I think it's Voltaire's quote saying, uncertainty is an uncomfortable position. Certainty is an absurd one. And you're kind of alluding to this earlier. Why do we do this? Why do we always want to be certain? And it's because the way the human brain is wired is we want answers. We hate either not knowing and being clueless, or having to admit ignorance. In our day and age, we're just now kind of getting to the point where people are becoming lauded and applauded for admitting ignorance. Ignorance doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means maybe you're not as educated on a particular topic. But of course, most people just say, no, I already know. You can take my word for it. I'm an authority. You don't have to question anything. But that's not the way to make progress. And so if we can get to the point where in society, people are applauded saying, I don't know, I'd like to learn more, I think that they should get extra credit in their courses and on their tests. Not that they're getting answers wrong or that they can't fill in the blank, but that they're not making crap up. Humans are great at making silly stuff up. I've got a whole chapter in there called a list of irrational nonsense. And it lists some entries on a Venn diagram that's available online that just wouldn't fit into the book. And it lists a Venn diagram of 5 different topics: pseudoscience, the paranormal, quack medicine, religion, and conspiracy theories. And I list about, 200 or 300 of these things, like the Illuminati and, all sorts of things like
alien
Bigfoot
bases
and crystal therapies.
in Antarctica. Really?
Alien bases in Antarctica. And again, this Venn diagram was made from a very Western culture perspective, and just probably from the last 50 or 60 years. But if they included everything that goes back centuries or millennia, and in all countries and all cultures, there would probably be millions, if not billions, of these irrational conclusions that, again, billions and trillions of people have probably believed and were certain about. Whereas we realize, well, what difference does it make how certain you are? You're still wrong. And then we can show you where you're wrong. But people don't want to say, well, I don't know the answer. They hate saying that. I hate saying it. But I've gotten a little bit better with it over time.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think the other problem is that as soon as you say I don't know, that gets weaponized, especially by people who have an agenda or a bias already. Okay, if there is and I've used this argument before. I do on occasion do a little anti-theist work, debates, stuff like that. And it gets where it's like, if I can't explain every single answer far enough down a line, well, now you have God. God must be it, because I don't have the answer. And so it makes me not want to say I don't know, because I know how that's going to be used. But on the flip side, the reality is I don't know, and I don't think that's a problem. But I want to quote something here from your book, which I thought was interesting. Another reason that humans seem to enjoy explaining away the unknown with supernatural or paranormal is that they love to upstage the experts, who are often held in veneration in society precisely because of their science education and investigative abilities, as well as their past successes. They love to think that they can embarrass the legitimate scientists, medical doctors, and the researchers who currently may not be able to give scientific, logical, or reasonable explanations for a given phenomenon. If the believer at least has some answer, quote, answer, they can point to these experts and justifiably claim that these experts are ignorant. This answer or premature conclusion is an example of why admitting and accepting one's own ignorance is so essential and even desirable.
Yes.
So,
but did you want to make any point about that, or?
Well, no. I was highlighting a section in the book that I thought sort of. I think I made the point first and then supported it with. You see, I'm looking a lot smarter than I actually am, because I can keep up with anything you say because I read the book before doing the show. So I'm like, oh yeah, really?
You believe that stuff? No, but yeah. The point I make there is that, again, people hate not knowing. They hate admitting ignorance, and of course, lots of people aren't interested in science or medicine, and they say, "Well, look at all these highfalutin doctors that went to school for so long, and they think they know so much, and yet I did something else, and it worked just as well. I guess I'm as validated as they are." And, again, in our society, these seemingly arbitrary authorities, these doctors or something, I guess we're supposed to venerate them, but they make everyone else feel small or dumb or ignorant by comparison. And so most people love the opportunity to show them up or to appear, well, I'm at least as smart as they are, and I didn't went to school that long. And people say, what's the big deal with learning science? It's like I can do everything I need to in my job and be successful and bring home the bacon and have a wonderful life without knowing the stuff in depth. And of course, we have today with anti-vaxxers. They say, well, I didn't learn any science, but I don't trust these doctor types who study this stuff for 30 and 40 years exclusively. I'm just going to believe what I want to believe because it makes me comfortable. And this is the danger. Exactly. He's rubbing his head in the background when the politicians are saying, like, well, we're going to ignore what you've done for the last 30 years. We know that there was a protocol set up to keep this from spreading, and we're going to ignore it. And he's going, this is a disaster. This is why you employed us. This is why we study this stuff. But that's what frustrates me. And that's why, again, it spurred the book, is because it doesn't just happen in medicine. It doesn't just happen in politics. It happens everywhere. And it happens with everybody. Nobody is immune to this. We all have this same brain. We can't escape the brain. And it follows us wherever we go. And it keeps saying, what you know is true. What you know is true. And people tend to stop there. They just say, okay, well, I think I already know the truth. Why think any harder anymore?
Scottish poet. And he wants only one thing out of life. He wanted to be the greatest poet in the world, in history. His poetry was god-awful. Absolutely awful, terrible. But he was loved in his village. He was beloved. He was a great human being, and he was kind to everybody and gave everything he had to everybody. And in his spare time, he would do this poetry. And he'd send it out, and it would get rejected. Finally, someone says, we're going to give back to him. And they intercept his poems. And a couple months later, they reply on behalf of the Nobel Prize Committee and all these others and say, your poetry has been accepted. It is the greatest poetry we have ever heard. You are a revolutionary poet. We love you. And his life, he is on cloud nine. He is one of the happiest man alive. But because nobody ever left the village, and because he had no interest in leaving the village, and was able to accept all of his acclaim from his little home in Scotland, he died, never knowing that none of this was true. So the question that this poses, if put as a philosophical question, is, would you, if you were the poet, want to know? And so I'm going to ask you this question, which is, you seem to be playing a very high value on truth, and this was something, as you pointed out, we were going to discuss at some point anyway. And Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out that he got a call from a therapist who said, people go see your show at the planetarium and they get depressed. They come back and they say, we are this tiny little speck in the middle of nowhere. And you mention this, where you say you may find yourself denying some discovery of science because it makes you feel uncomfortable or doesn't bring you as much pleasure or satisfaction as your current belief. Why would someone want to think of themselves merely as one of billions of humans on a tiny planet in an average solar system and in a mundane universe in a run-of-the-mill galaxy? Oh, you are fucking depressing. Give me a break. Oh, dude. Oh, some people don't like having me around. I wonder why. Have you ever done any self-reflection on that, doctor? It can be unsettling to think that the vast majority of the cosmos may not even be aware of your existence. But your personal happiness and emotions don't determine truth. If you are set out in your life with the underlying desire that every truth that you accept must end up making you happy or content, your brain is quite capable of rationalizing everything to that end. There is no law stating that the universe owes you recognition or relevance or even purpose. I don't even know why I brought you on this show, quite frankly. This really is depressing.
I should have warned you.
You did. To be fair, you did. All right. So, so this is the problem of the Scottish poet. And you seem to be making the argument, better for the Scottish poet to have known the truth. Is that so, and why?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the Scottish poet. I can only speak for myself. But this all goes back to what is truth and what is reality. I mean, do you want to know the truth, or do you only want to know it if it makes you happy? And of course, I think a pretty strong argument can be made by one side saying, Todd, why would I want to know the truth if it's going to make me miserable? If I live 80, 85 years and die happy with a smile on my face, with people loving me and venerating me, even though I was living a delusion, what's wrong with that? And I say, well, I can't speak for you. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. I can only speak for myself, and that I like to at least aspire to the intellectual honesty and integrity of examining my beliefs and to try to find out as much reality and truth as possible. And I totally realize that discovering that I'm minuscule, some people with their bias would think, oh my God, I'm minuscule, I don't matter. My life has no meaning, it has no purpose because I'm so small compared to the cosmos. And I say, okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. And maybe your brain is kind of making you feel that way. To me, I prefer, and I'm biased, here's my bias, I like the Carl Sagan aspect that, hey, humanity is a way of the universe, since we're part of the universe, of looking back at itself and discovering itself, to actually have consciousness. And who cares how small you are?
To interrupt for 1 second, do you want to know how small COVID is?
Oh, I know. It's ridiculously small. You probably couldn't even see it with an electron microscope.
Yeah, it seems to have some impact regardless of size. I'm not sure. It's the bias. You had made a bias.
Exactly right.
You had talked about a bias of a crystal, right? People look at a snowflake and say, well, it's perfectly formed, ergo it must have been created, and yada, yada. And then there's this bias of size having significance, but the reality is the most important. One of the things that's affecting this country and the entire species more than anything in 100 years is so small, none of us can see it. So, but exactly. I apologize. I did cut you off.
No, that's fine. I mean, but it brings the point home that size doesn't matter. I mean, just because I'm a dust mote on another dust mote in an insignificant solar system in one galaxy of 300 billion doesn't mean that I don't matter. I mean, hopefully I matter both to myself and to my immediate environment and my family. I prefer to think of it, and of course this is a bias, the way Richard Dawkins says in his video, we are going to die. But we're going to die, but that makes us the lucky ones. We won the cosmic lottery. We were actually born. And there's far more people that will never be born that's made possible by our DNA. So I glorify in that fact that I've been given so far 58 years and hopefully a few more to be able to make a difference, even if it's just in my small city, my small state, my small planet, wherever it is, that I've been given an opportunity. To me, that's me giving myself purpose. I don't need a supernatural being to give me a purpose. I say, well, what can I do? How can I make my life better? How can I possibly make other people's lives better? I don't care how small I am. I've been given a brain that's halfway decent. And what could I do with that? And how could I keep from doing as much damage as possible by catching my biases, by thinking critically? Could I avoid making other people less healthy or less or miserable just by my mistakes? And if everybody had more of an idea like that, but who cares if we're small and insignificant and cut off from the rest of the universe, but we've been given a gift, and we've been given the gift of the best brain that we know of. But most people don't want to use it. They just say, I'm just going to sail along because it's so much more easy and comfortable to do it that way. Thinking is hard. Our brains just gobble up the glucose in our body and our oxygen way more than our muscles and our hearts and our liver. And the more that we use it, the more it's going to tax us. And I have to tax my own brain sometimes to make things make sense. But our insignificant size has no bearing on me. I can't speak for the Scottish poet. I can only say, for me, it's got to be a search for truth.
You reminded me actually too of, and I think this the working man's chip on his shoulder. The working man that says, "Well, there's the ivory tower elites, and all they do is sit and think and contemplate their navel and all this other stuff." While I'm out there getting real work done. And it's occurred to me that most of the ones that I've met who've done that, and they sit there and tell me that I couldn't do the labor they could. Maybe not. Maybe not. But it strikes me that they couldn't do what I do either, and it ain't easy. It just ain't fucking easy. But just because you don't see it, I guess is which gets back to, but what was the there was that was I think that's
well, I was going to add on to the end of that.
Please.
I've known quite a few working class people. I see them as patients, of course, and whenever we have people come to our house to do work, I like to watch them. And what I've discovered, there's of course a few of the working class Joes who say exactly what you say. It says, what's the big deal about thinking? But what I actually find is that about 95% of them are way more intelligent than anyone gives them credit for. They say, they come and work for me, they find out I'm a doctor and says, well, I'm no doctor, but, I'm an electrician. I say, no, you're a doctor. You have to diagnose this problem. You have to prescribe for it. You have to be able to do surgery to make this circuit work. You're using the exact same critical skills that I do, just in a different way. And so, I don't care about the designation doctor. I mean, it's a traditional affectation. But I know people that work in construction. I know plumbers. I know people that lay tile that have spoken incredibly eloquently to me. And to me, it seems like they're sometimes starved for good conversation. I think people just assume, well, you're working class, so you must not, be very smart or very educated. And when it turns out they've got the same brain I do. And so I try to give them as much respect as anybody else at any level of strata, because again, with such similar brains, we're all way more alike than we are different. I use an example in the book of having 8 brains out in front of you, in a mortuary. Can you look at them and tell who's the scientist, who's the sociopath, who's the scullery maid, who's the construction worker? No. They all look almost identical. Maybe a pathologist or somebody who studies brains could tell a little bit of difference. They could probably look at Einstein's brain, see a few more sulci or gyri or something, and think that must be his. But the vast majority of them are so incredibly similar that if we didn't have faces on the front of them, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Well, and actually, you did an interesting thought experiment, which I'll get to in a minute. But since I am both host and at the present producer of the show, and producing strikes me as very similar to what you described, I have adjusted my title here accordingly, so based entirely on your recommendations. So thank you. No, so you did an interesting thought experiment, which was what if you couldn't see any of the other organs, keeping in mind that skin is also an organ, of a human being. No organs except the brain, which, of course, as you just said, basically, and certainly no layman can look at 30 brains and identify which among them is Einstein versus the sociopath versus, it really can't be done. So you take a look at, and there's a few in the live chat wanted to say hi to us, Patrick, a whole bunch of people dropping in, but we've been going on the conversation, so I haven't had much time. And then Titan, who, oh dear Lord, he's a troll, and you can't stop it. And what was it that Titan said when he said that certainty was certainty has no place in critical thought? And Titan asks, "Are you sure of that?" I have no idea who let him onto the channel, quite frankly, but yeah.
It's an ironic statement.
But anyways, what I found really interesting about this is I like to think of myself as reasonably egalitarian. So gender, sex, none of these things really particularly matter to me, and I'm very interested in how people think and what they have to say, and it's their content, the content of their character that really gets to me, and I have a very hard time. And I've found, and I do this, which is really funny, which is I'll be really attracted to a person. I was wow, that's a beautiful person. That's a this, that. And I get to know them, and I was just like, ooh, oh, a bad person. I do not like this person. And all of a sudden they're not attractive anymore. And I actually forget I have to, I journal in part for this reason, is so I can check my memories against the reality. And it's a little disconcerting when they don't match, which happens reasonably frequently. But, I'll sit there and say, I never thought that person was attractive. Like, oh, yeah, you did, Nick. No, I didn't. Please tell. No, I can maybe see what other people, how could I? And then I go back, I was like, oh, shit, I did. And it was just, I genuinely don't remember it. But, you begged me to mod. What? No, I didn't. I didn't beg anyone to mod. I have no idea. You see, speaking of memories, I think he's rewriting memories about how he became a mod, self-aggrandizing. He said he seems to think like this channel got attacked somehow and he saved it or something, but I don't know what he's talking about. At any rate, but what I doing that thought experiment that you talked about, where it's nothing but brains. Imagine that everything else in the human for a human being completely transparent. You can see through all of it except the brain. That's all you had to judge who you were talking to. That was an interesting thought experiment to do. That took a little consideration, because I'm sitting there going like, wow, now it's not that I'm ignoring my biases. It's not that I'm sitting there and saying, yep, nope, I'm just not taking any of that into account. I couldn't if I wanted to. I couldn't, if I wanted to, come up with anything
That's why I used
other. I liked it. I liked that one a lot, and I brought it up now because I thought it fit in. So that was a. So do you want to talk? I mean, I sort of meant. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that analogy, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to that. One, like you say, when you have nothing to base your judgment on except what the brain is producing. You can't go by beauty. You can't go by, for example, height, color of skin, gender, sexual identity, politics, or well, maybe if the brain produced some opinions on politics, sure, you could judge on that. But isn't it interesting to think how you have to take the thoughts themselves, the opinions themselves, as your only takeaway? You don't get to try to judge this person. Should I trust them? What are their credentials? I don't know. They're transparent. All I see is their brain here, but the brain is telling me something. And so I think it's a wonderful experiment in saying, would I think differently if I wasn't so darned biased? I mean, again, we all have biases. We don't necessarily like to admit them. But, if you don't like somebody of a different race or something like that, you're probably not going to listen to their thoughts nearly as much. But the other reason why I brought up the thought experiment was that if you saw in the world nothing but a bunch of bobbing brains walking, driving their cars, somewhere like that.
Which was a little bit of a gruesome. It took me a minute to adjust to that, because I was doing the experiment. I was just like, ooh, okay. And do I see the glasses? If they've got glasses on, so is it just a brain with glasses that are just like a little okay? I don't know. I'll
just
follow
a brain
you for this. Okay.
But when you boil it all down, that's what is running this planet. Is a bunch of brains bobbing around. We're used to seeing them encased in faces and people, and we're biased to accept that. We're used to dealing with humans when we're dealing with reasoning animals, and so when you strip all that away, you realize, oh my God, these people that are storming the Capitol on the 6th, they're a bunch of bobbing brains. The people that were trying to oppose them, they're a bunch of bobbing brains. These brains are what are kind of, quote unquote, in charge of the planet. And of course, with, global warming, whether people accept that it's anthropocentric, that it is being produced by humans or not, it's happening. You start wondering, my God, this is what is changing the entire planet. And again, even when you take a single brain or even billions of brains and you look at it from space, they hardly make a blip on the map at all. An incredibly small amount of the biomass on this earth is responsible for just about everything. And when you strip away the skin and everything, just look at that brain, it's kind of sobering to think that it's just 3 pounds of evolved nervous tissue that somehow found itself together that's responsible for this. I don't know if I can go much beyond that, but it kind of makes you wonder. It's like, wow, I see your face. I mean, you have a great face. But if I just saw you for your brain, would I necessarily think as highly of you? Maybe I'm just too biased by a good-looking guy.
At any rate, yeah.
You know, with very erudite and learned and stuff like that. But you know, how would I think differently that way? It's interesting because again, we're just so biased with all these things.
Well, I think you pointed out too that the brain is what, like 2 pounds roughly, and of all of the, if a human being is about 100 on average, 180 pounds. So most of that human being is actually there to support the brain in one way or another. When your immune system starts to try to protect your body, it will eventually, if it has to, sacrifice your brain to try to stay alive. But that's the last thing it sacrifices, right? Your entire body is actually designed to try to keep the brain alive. And it's about your brain getting what it needs and going to go get. So basically, it seems like the rest of it is still just there to support the brain. Was that sort of roughly what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, the body, your legs, your arms, the legs are a conveyance vehicle to get you from point A to point B. Your arms are there to interact with your environment physically. And of course, your genitals are there to procreate, to pass on your genes to the next generation that'll have a very similar brain.
And so that you can age faster once you have kids. But yeah, please, none of this gray was here until I procreated. But I don't know the thinking of that. Somebody can, but please, yeah.
But then you have like your digestive system to be able to take in matter, convert it to energy. Your brain and your heart and your liver and everything can use. Your liver's there to process things, your kidneys to filter, your lungs to breathe. But it's all to support that 2.5 to 3 pounds. That's really all we are. It's everything we use to think, to have ideas, our emotions, our memories. Everything about who we are is that. It's not the face, it's not the arms and the legs. And it kind of reminds me of the movie Pacific Rim, if you ever saw Pacific Rim. They build these humongous
I
40
have
or 50...
standards in movies, but anyways, please continue.
Okay. It was escapism. But they build these 40 or 50 story tall robots to battle Godzilla-like monsters. But they have a little human inside driving it. That's kind of the way I think of the brain inside of us. Is like it's the little driver, and the rest of this is just to get around and do what we want it to do. And some people are uncomfortable thinking about their bodies as just a meat sack to harbor this and to keep it safe and that kind of thing. But that's what it boils down to. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of or to be depressed about. It's just, again, it's the reality. It's the truth. And if you can accept the truth, it's not a good thing or bad thing. It's simply the truth.
Is that what you think this book is? Is that what you're hoping in this book, that it's going to be a pathway to truth?
I actually put it in the preface. I say this book does not produce truth. It is a way to clear the path to truth. Truth or truths. There might be multiple truths, but the problem is people get bogged down in wild goose chases, chasing red herrings, going down rabbit holes, and getting bogged down in mires with their biases and their fallacies. It slows them down to find the truth. They say, I'm okay with my biases. I'm okay with using the shortcuts, the heuristics to get it day in and day out work done so that I can be successful. And that's enough. And so I guess whatever I'm doing that's making me successful, that must be the truth. And of course, it rarely is. It's just been expedient to get you what you needed. And for a lot of people, that's enough. They just say, I lived a good life. I took wonderful vacations. People love me. What's to complain about here? What's to critique about this? And I say, well, I can't say that you're wrong. I mean, if you've had a great life, that's fantastic. But all I know is I have to sleep with myself every night, and I've got a conscience. And if I thought to myself, just because I was comfortable with that thought and that opinion for 30 or 40 years, and later on I found out I was wrong, the guilt in me would be profound if I hadn't at least tried to question myself. So I can't believe that I was so comfortable with that incorrect conclusion, and I just went with it because I was still happy. So again, if the truth makes me depressed, even if it makes me feel hopeless, I still would rather have the truth. It's like, why would anyone want to be depressed? That sounds so silly. It says, well, it's not for quality of life, it's for quality of truth. And again, if nobody can agree on what truth is, again, we're just all going to be squabbling and bickering, and there's not going to be any consensus on anything, and the progress is going to be much slower. We've sped up progress over the last 100 years, but it could be so much faster. I use an example in the book of, wouldn't it be wonderful in a debate where you got these two entertaining talking heads, and behind each of them is a scoreboard that would list every logical fallacy that they used and the cognitive bias. And would just cross it out and say, you got penalized, that can no longer be used in this discussion. And of course, what will be left is going to be very small and meager. But at least whatever is left that isn't a bias or a fallacy has some chance of being closer to truth and actually leading to something productive. I don't know if it'll ever be done. Maybe somebody online could do it. Probably hard to do in real time because you'd really have to be able to recognize these biases and fallacies fast on the fly while they were going on to the next topic. But a lot of people do reviews of debates. They say, okay, I saw Hitchens versus D'Souza, and let me show you where D'Souza was using a fallacy, and even Hitchens wasn't above a little bit of sophistry himself. Very entertaining. Very entertaining, but of course, in the end, he's kind of arguing against himself because he's not using critical thinking in that instance. He is very good at critical thinking in other aspects. But it would be so wonderful to review any of those kind of debates and show line by line where they were making these mistakes. And then when people see that, it says, I watched that debate and I was really kind of convinced until you pointed this out. Oh my God, I didn't realize that so-and-so was using that fallacy. He had no leg to stand on at all, but I was convinced. I was fooled. And those are those humbling moments that I still have to this day. I said, man, I really want to believe what that person said. And then somebody showed me where he was wrong. And I was going like, oh, crap, I did it again. I'm not thinking critically. I'm being fooled. So it's humbling, but it's a good exercise. It's good to be humbled on a regular basis so you quit listening to yourself without questioning. You've got to say, I feel good about this, but I don't know if I've really thought about this enough. I don't know if I'll ever be able to think about it enough. And my brother has, he sometimes says, Todd, you sound like you're talking about kind of paralysis by analysis. You're saying like, well, if you just keep on questioning things and you never come to a conclusion that you're comfortable with, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything. Well, I'm not saying that you should question yourself and never do anything. Sometimes we have to vote, even when we don't know enough about a topic. But you can at least question yourself as much as you can and try to, again, chip away these fallacies and biases that you use and that you have as much as possible. And then, everyone's got a deadline. You have a deadline to vote. You have a deadline for the project you're working on. You have a deadline for the show you got to do. You would have liked it to have been a little bit better, a little bit tighter, a little bit more well-produced. But you say, hey, I got sick kids at home. I got other stuff I got to do. I'll do the best I can with what I've got. And but again, it takes work. It takes a lot of mental effort.
That example sounds completely pulled out of thin air. So we'll just ignore that one for now. Well, the other one, you were like, Hitchens.
It was handy.
Hitchens on occasion, would get hyperbolic. Celestial North Korea? No, not Hitchens. But at any rate, the thing I was thinking about, though, I used to be a Christian deist, and my deconversion was difficult. And I think as you get older, it's harder. It's not, and I wasn't old, but I wasn't young either. And but there's this mental exercise I think most Christians do in one way or another to sort of ask themselves if they're a good person, which is, what would I do if there were no God, if God was not watching in one way or another? Because it's not just good enough to just be a good person. The whole point really to most Christians, not all, but if you listen to Jesus, I think where you're kind of stuck with is that you're supposed to be a good person for its own sake. And so you can't be a Christian and remove God from the equation. So it's more of a mental exercise. And because of that, a lot of Christians I met feel very safe saying, I would be good even if there were no God. I would be good even if I would be a good person. And the interesting thing about this is it kind of tests that, in my view, because it's sort of like, okay, would you, it seems to me that we tend to have better outcomes the closer we are to truth. And right now we are living in, I think, arguably the best age in human history. We have the most free time of any other time in our history. We have more to do with that free time. I mean, hey, prisoners have lots of free time, but that's not necessarily a good thing. So we have more to do with that free time. We are living longer, happier, healthier lives right now than at any time in human history. And I think, arguably, that is because of people who have been doing critical thinking and who have learned to solve these problems so that we can master nature and make our lives better. So the question is, okay, if it costs you some of your own comfort, which listen, all good things have to be hard. They have to be hard to do, otherwise they wouldn't be good. They'd be the norm. They'd be what everybody does. If it's going to be good, it has to challenge you in some way. It has to cost something.
Yeah.
So when I was reading this and I was looking over this, are we going to choose truth over comfort? It seems to me that you would really, when you talked about everything that's been lost by people who haven't done this, I think is your best argument to what we have today is from the people who have. And to some extent, you can't blame them either, because it's like the scientific method has really only been has coalesced. It's not even fully codified, really, but it's coalesced over the last 300 years. So, people beforehand would have a very hard time doing this because we hadn't, as a species, sat down and really figured out that we have to. But nonetheless, we sit here at this asking ourselves, what's more important, our comfort or, each other is kind of what it sounds like to me. Am I reading too much? That's what I saw reading your description of what's already been lost.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, people were comfortable enough, for example, during the Dark Ages, thinking, okay, the plague is either punishment from God, or the Jews are poisoning the wells, or the air is bad quality, whatever. They say, well, at least, okay, we're only going to live to be about 25 years old because of it, but at least I got an answer. At least I know why this is happening. I don't have to just wonder, why did my 8-year-old child just die from this? It says, oh, well, it's part of the natural order. It's part of what God wanted, or, there's a tribe that's poisoning the wells or something like this. And so they were willing to set aside any kind of investigation because they already thought they had an answer. It may not have been very satisfying, but at least they were satisfied to a certain extent that they had an answer. They weren't wondering anymore what was causing it. Either the clergy said it was God, either the ones that were against the Jews said it was the Jews, or there were some mystics out there that said it was miasma floating around and poisoning everybody. And how many millions of people died needlessly? Then finally someone says, we kind of put our effluents really close to the water well, and anyone ever think that might not be a good idea? And then eventually they come up with, then Leeuwenhoek came up with a simple microscope, and he looked at a drop of water and says, holy crap, there's stuff swimming in here. And then they say, well, gee, maybe we ought to look at this a little bit closer. And I won't belabor the whole thing, but the more investigation, the more that people weren't satisfied with some answer. He said, I'm tired of my family dying, and my children dying at birth, or these things from these things. Is there anything we might be able to do? And as you allude to, it was the investigators. It was what became known as scientists, engineers, technicians who were able to figure these things out and make life better. But then you also start off by saying, well, what makes things good? How do you live a good life? And does a Christian think that, some of them think that you do need God in your life or Jesus in your life to be a good person. Some say, no, even without that, I think I could be a good person. You start saying to those people that think they could be good without God, what is it that would make you good? Is it still God that somehow wrote his laws on your heart? Or do you just feel like, well, no, I seem to get along with people a lot better when I'm nice and I share things and, everybody gets their part. you could always turn the table on any believer, saying like, I mean, do you really think that this JC of yours is a good person? I mean, you do realize that if he said that if you don't believe in him, you're going to fry in hell forever. As bad as Jehovah was in the Old Testament, I think that Jesus is way worse when he says, look, a nice guy here, but you don't believe in me, you're frying. And to me, that's way scarier than Jehovah.
Hitchens made the same argument. That it wasn't until Jesus meek and mild that we have burning, and at least in the Old Testament, and at least in North Korea, you can die.
Exactly.
It's an interesting. I'm always fast. I always enjoy that argument. Sister Porpoise, our super chat. Payment deadlines for my upcoming comp sci classes. Not quite sure what that means, but that's all right because she actually pointed out something that I want to bring up. It may be apocryphal. I don't know. I first learned it as apocryphal then by an authority. So I'm going to appeal to authority here. Learn that it was because I haven't told you the authority. It's not even just an appeal to an authority. So I'm going to stack as many biases as I can on this one. But whatever it is, it was an interesting example of the plague when it first came out, and the notion that it wasn't on the rats per se. It was on the fleas that were on rats and various vermin. But nonetheless, that when everybody started dying, they went to the clergy to say what's going on, and the clergy said it's witches, so we have to kill the witches, and we have to kill their familiars, which of course are cats. Now this resulted in the burning of a number of women who, it turns out, actually did nothing wrong, and killing of the cats, which actually in this particular case was morally not as bad, but certainly worse for the society because the cats were keeping the rodent population under control. And as soon as the cats died, this incorrect, just sort of, and it was you had mentioned. So I like the Tinkerbell effect, which, by the way, sir, was not in your list of biases. The Tinkerbell effect, look it up. But actually,
well, all I can say to that is, I wanted to keep the book that you could actually fit in your hand. Okay, if I listed all the biases and fallacies, we'd be talking about 800 volumes. So, but go on with the.
Well, if you want to keep that book short, don't let me edit it for you. Is all I have to say.
Exactly.
Well, I learned the Tinkerbell effect, and it seems to have now changed over time. But the way I had learned it was essentially a form of magical thinking, which is to say that the likelihood of a belief is directly correlated to how strongly you believe that belief. So the more strongly you believe it, the more likely it is to be true. So the idea being that in a church, you actually have to pump the gas on the magical thinking, that there is degrees to it, and you are more likely to get a positive outcome the stronger your faith is. And so it's very much in the, do you believe in fairies or not? And you can,
you use the phrase that the stronger you believe,
yes,
the better your outcome is going to be. Now, could you be more specific about a specific good outcome?
Well, no, that is the argument. That is the belief of the Tinkerbell effect. So if somebody fails at a certain outcome, the reason was their belief was wanting. It may still have been good, but not good enough. And we have a tendency to believe that. And you had mentioned actually one of the other. I forget what you called it. I probably wrote it down here. But it was sort of how you get this intuition that if you concentrate, you could actually telekinetically move things, and that this is actually a phenomenon that people actually think this, right? That they think if they concentrate hard enough, they should be able to do it. And it turns out you can't, but there is that same phenomenon thinking that actually if you believe something strongly enough, you can commit that belief to reality. You can change reality just by wishing hard enough. It's essentially a magical thinking. It's the same thing. The Tinkerbell effect now refers to something slightly different, probably more apropos, but nonetheless. And I have no idea why about that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, like you say, one of the biases I put into the book is the backfire effect. You're talking with an opponent, and you're showing them where they're wrong. Now, they probably start feeling a little cognitive dissonance going like, holy crap, they brought up a point. I hadn't thought about that. And it flies in the face of what I think I know and what I'm really comfortable with. But then what do? It backfires and they buckle down even stronger. So here you are saying the stronger you believe something, the more energy you put into it, the more time you devote to that belief, it's a kind of a perpetuation of it. It's again, confirmation bias, and that you want to keep on believing what you already believe. You don't want to be proven wrong. You might have had your position for years or decades. How embarrassing would it be in front of somebody to have them show you where you're wrong? And so you're going to buckle down and be defensive. And this is where typically it turns into a personal fight. Well, you're just a jerk. You don't respect me. You don't respect anything. You don't even have a rational conversation anymore. It's more, I got to do an ad hominem to try to distract people from the fact that he's showing me wrong. So, that's what scares me, is that people will get their belief that they want to believe, and then their brain is capable of using those logical fallacies and those biases to reinforce it over and over for year after year. Sometimes it won't even let in new evidence. You show the anti-vaxxers vaccination facts and studies done by experts for decades. They don't care. It's like, I don't want to believe that. It doesn't make me happy. And so they don't have to use rational argument. All they have to do is say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and you're just, we'll agree to disagree. And I hate that. No, you're just all you're doing is you're denying science, which is not a way to progress.
So how do you use reason and logic to convey to someone the importance of reason and logic if they don't yet agree that there's any importance to reason and logic?
Again, it probably depends on what they want. Again, if they want a happy life, they may not be interested in reason or logic at all. It says, I live my life. I don't want to think deeply like this. It's just too much mental energy. I don't know how convincing I can be. I tend to use myself as an example. I like to say, look, I really was comfortable with a lot of my beliefs for years. Then I realized, holy cow, I had no leg to stand on. And even though it always hurts, it hurts to know that you're wrong. I always get a pang of pain. But as time has gone on, I'm getting over it much faster. When I can admit, and one thing that helps is getting married and being told by your wife that you're wrong.
You're wrong a lot more once you got married, but yeah.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you. And it was one of the hardest things I ever had to overcome. But what I've discovered is when I admit it early on, it's way better than blubbering and saying, I think I can support my position, yada, yada. I says, you know what? Okay, yeah, I was just parroting what I've been saying for the last 20 years. Okay. But then now progress is made. I had a little pang of pain because I was wrong, but now my worldview is just a little bit more accurate. Maybe I've discovered just a tiny little more morsel of truth. I see what reality is just a little bit better. I'm probably being fooled in a lot of other ways, but at least I'm a little bit better. I'm making progress. And so that's why I say people that admit their ignorance and admit that they're wrong should be lauded. People just say, thank you so much for your honesty. Thank you for wanting to advance this discussion rather than just holding to your guns and being entertaining. So,
well, I'm going to disagree with you slightly on that one. I think that's a decent strategy. That's what you first learn when you've been married just a little bit. What you learn later on is that you only really have to admit that you're wrong in a very small circle, because she's been around you long enough that she has no interest in the other circles. So it's like in that circle, it's like, yes, honey, you're right. I was terribly wrong. And then the other circle's like, yeah, she got no idea what she's talking about, man. I put her in her place.
Okay, well, Nick, the reality is I pick my battles.
She's watching the show. You
Your
don't
wife?
have to go anytime soon. Yeah, she's watching the show. Yeah, got it. Yes. Thank you for helping me with that play, Dr. Todd. We just enacted a scene from Your new play, no, okay, good.
Your wife's going to love this.
She knows my sense of humor very well and married me anyway, so I'm a lucky guy.
Oh, okay, cool. Yes.
So what I wanted to say is, first of all, to the audience, if you've gotten this far on the show, and it's been a 90-minute show, and I think it's been a good one. So I hope you guys will like and subscribe. It really does help us in the algorithm. Share this show to anybody who you think might be interested. That also is a great way to show support. We will be doing our Patreon meeting. The Soutter family is unfortunately rather ill. My hope is it's not going to affect our schedule. My anticipation is it won't, but it's we're going to do the patron hangout at some point very soon, but it has been postponed. But I hope you will consider becoming a patron and supporting content like this. I think we're all very proud of the content, and we have a lot of mods and volunteers who help out. Thank you to all of you. As a quick reminder, tomorrow we are going to be having overtime with Joe Serious Mind, who really doesn't like being called Joe Serious Minds. He's not here, so and everyone's kind of learning that it's like my if he's not here, he doesn't know. I guess he's Joe and he's Serious Mind. You're not supposed to add the two. It was Monty who did that. But at any rate, and then we're going to be having the discussion on COVID, which I think is just, I really wish it weren't going to be important, but I think it's going to be. I think it actually already is and has been for a while. And I think it's, we're going to have a adult conversation on COVID. So this is happy go joy fun a week on in time, but I do hope you'll like and subscribe to the stream. Come join us on the Discord. Unfortunately, because I do have to go, I'm gonna not be available on the Discord afterwards. I don't think Dr. Todd will be either. Now, Todd, I just called you Todd, and I think you had told me before on Neil's show that was okay, but I'm not used to doing that with a guest because
that's fine.
I do.
My nickname is Toad, and I answer to that as well.
Toad. Well, that one, okay. That one I think I'll be comfortable doing. Yeah, I can do that. So Toad. Oh, wow, that really does roll off the tongue there. So, Dr. Todd, you just finished the third edition of this. Is that right?
Not finished, still in the works.
Okay.
But yeah, we're hoping maybe in 3 or 4 months to come out with it. And again, I'm lucky and fortunate enough to have
Anthony. I'm sorry. Yeah. Joe's in the live chat. He was lurking. I'm not even kidding. Not even kidding. At least Monty's gone. But yeah, Joe, that was our play. But we've done a lot of plays tonight. And Dr. Todd's been really helpful with these plays. Hopefully, we're going to have a show tomorrow with Joe. It may be Joe browbeating me for an hour, but we'll see. Good to see you, Joe. Thanks. Like and subscribe, please. So I'm sorry. So you're working on in 4 months. I think you said you're hoping to be done with it. And just what's the name of the book? And the second edition is right now available. Is that correct?
That's correct, on Amazon and also in a Kindle version. It's called The Final Pattern, The Critical Need for Critical Thinking. It has my pseudonym, which is T.F. Hanlon, which I use because as a doctor, I have many believers as my patients. And if they discovered that my anti-theistic bent of the book, they're probably not going to appreciate that. So it does say T.F. Hanlon and not T.F. Miller. In the third edition, we have 3 additional chapters going in. It'll be an expanded edition. I'm planning on having it illustrated, so it's not quite so dry with just prose. And the thing I'm most proud of is that I'm working with 3 different individuals that are involved in medicine and neurology. Dr. Shaheen Lakan, who's an MD, PhD, and a fellow in the American Academy of Neurology. A colleague of his, Emanuela Afadani, who also works in epidemiology and clinical psychology. And also Nicola, I always forget the name, Nicola Vukovic, who is a specialist in both AI, machine learning, and in clinical psychology. And they're going to try to put a little bit more of a scientific and medical bent on why humans think the way that they do. I still written the book in what I hope to be a very approachable level of prose. The idea being that anybody in any country, any time of history, if this were translated into their language, hopefully would be able to understand it and recognize themselves in it. But for people that think, well, this is just one person's opinion, yada, 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 is there any real scientific or medical basis to this? And so I've got these three at least online. What it looks like is probably going to happen is with future editions, more and more of their colleagues are going to come online giving their 2 cents and try to give a little bit more scientific and medical validity to what I have, basically to this point, conjectured.
It sounds like it's turning into a bit more of a living document. I do want to just make one observation. Okay, you said, hold on one second. Let me make sure I've got the, yes, I do, and just because that got changed, yeah. So, you had said that, you made this book easy to read, and if I may,
tried to.
Yes. Let me I'm going to read an interesting passage from this book which caught my
You can't
eye.
be critical about it.
I'm not being critical. I completely 100% support.
Share me a new one. Share me a new one. Let's go. Bring it on. Come on.
Quote. This is a quote. This book was written to contain simple wording and maintain clarity. Technical terms come to an absolute minimum, avoiding a didactic tone. Instead, any questions to the reader are posed colloquially, as if asking the average person in an everyday vernacular. Really?
So you're going to give me some examples here. You're going to give me the examples that fly in the face of this.
Yeah. How about the quote itself?
I see.
In a vernacular.
The irony of the quote.
Yes, vernacular is easy
Nobody
to read.
reads the preface anyway.
You could have said in an everyday voice, in an everyday tone, in an everyday manner, everyday vernacular, Mr. Thesaurus.
My dad was a technical writer, okay? It rubbed off. But nobody reads the preface anyway. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's how I found it, was by not reading the preface.
But no, truly, I mean, I think that any truth there is out there can at some level be whittled down to something simple. If you have to use 5-syllable words every other word and, wow people with vocabulary, you're saying like, well, what are they trying to get away with? Are they trying to snowball me with a bunch of stuff? But if you put it in simple language that almost anybody can read, then they can think for themselves and see, does this make sense to me? And is there anything to this? Again, what I would love eventually, if it caught on well enough, is for it to be translated into 70 languages, including for New Guinea Aborigines in their language. They should be able to read this and say, you know what? I think we made these gods up ourselves because we were tired of seeing our village flooded every other year, and so we created a river guard that got mad at us. And if that could help them forward to find a little more truth, a little bit more reality.
Oh, I agree. If there's anything the Aborigines need, it's to be more depressed. Great. Good job. Thanks. I think you're on
no
the ball.
God, oh, come on,
I'm
man.
so glad you're on the case, Dr. Toad.
Well, people say that, says, well, if you take away people's gods and you take away their cathedrals and this beautiful art and stuff like that, what are they going to have to enjoy? To say, gee, I wish we'd had that chance for the last few millennia just to find out what we could have come up with. It's like Darwin says, I wonder what Beethoven's, evolutionary oratorio would have sounded like. Or, when, Picasso would make a huge mural out of evolution. Humans are pretty good at, transcending things and like Hitchens would say, enjoying the numinous. So even without gods, we can discover this. I love classical music without ever having any love of a god. Lots of things transcend my life and my reality. But the problem is most people say, well, I want to attribute this numinous feeling, this transcendence, to something supernatural that just seems bigger than me. I want to give it the credit. Again, I can't stop them. I'm just saying, like, it's not necessary. And it's probably not as close to reality if you will just question why you're doing this in the first place. Why do you feel the need to give the credit to something else? Take the credit for yourself.
I think that's a really important observation, and one that's very easy to not understand the depth of that observation. I'd also like to add that you commented on this earlier, and it's in your book, that Einstein, as unique and as special as he was, and that mistake aside, wasn't special in that he didn't actually invent anything. What he did was discover things that were already there, and if he hadn't done it, somebody else would have. But that begs the other question: how many other Einsteins were, for example, black, but because of slavery, they weren't able to give their genius to the people around them, at least if they so choose, who couldn't participate and couldn't be active members of the society? How many were women and for one reason or another couldn't at a minimum take on a male name so that maybe they could sort of half publish their ideas when their husbands weren't looking under a pseudonym? How many marvelous things, how many Picassos have been lost because they were women and couldn't? How many, and all of these things because we didn't see the brain, we saw the woman or the skin color or and all of these things that we haven't done. So I think you make a very good argument for that in your book. So while I would very much like to make fun of you, and if I ever get another chance, sir, I absolutely will. So just like, that's inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. But I think that was a point that you made very well. So, I think you're.
Well, it's sobering to me when you think about how throughout history, like you say, billions of people, billions of women, billions of ethnic minorities in whatever country, totally squelched because of their outward appearance, or that they simply weren't accepted for their sexual identity or their gender identity. And you use the example of the medieval cleric burning witches. And I put myself in that witch's place as she's being set fire and being burned alive. What does she think of her fellow human being? She's like, oh my God, these guys are animals. They're not using their brains. They've decided they don't like me. They're looking for a scapegoat. To me, that is so incredibly sobering. And that point of how much further along could we have been if, for example, Einstein's wife, who was also a physicist, but was totally overshadowed and overlooked because of Einstein, what would she have added? If Marie Curie hadn't just been, maybe her husband was doing a lot of the work and, she got some accolades. The movie Hidden Figures about the African-American women that made orbital mechanics possible, but had been overlooked for decades. I'm lucky in one way that I'm a white male in America. I haven't had a whole lot of bias against me. The one big bias is that if people learn that I'm a non-believer, they say, oh, of course, he's bad because he can't be moral without God. That's the one bias that people probably say about me, but very few people know that about me. But I haven't had to fight against misogyny or racial inequality or any kind of sexual identity or gender identity issue. I'm kind of mainstream there. It doesn't make me right or wrong. It just makes me common. But of course, it's the strength of the majority that tends to overcome the minority. But the fact that those people said, I've got just as good a brain as this person and nobody's listening to me, how that must have made them feel. What was their purpose in life? What was their worth? And as they were being burned alive for being different, what they must have thought of their fellow man that had the same brain that you and I have. And the sobering thing is that what would it take for my brain to be twisted in that way? That if I was misled and thought, well, okay, some bad things must be due to witches or some kind of evil spirit, I'm probably not that much smarter than that cleric. Maybe I could be twisted into doing something totally inhumane. And so when people say, what's the harm of letting people believe what they want to believe? Those are the moments that I think about. I think of the people that have been cast aside, have been disenfranchised, have been marginalized, have been ignored, or in some cases, victims of a genocide or been burnt alive. And I say, sorry, I'm not going to let people believe what they want just because it makes them feel good. I'm going to say, have you ever questioned that belief?
Remind me of Anthony Magravasco, who we just had on not that long ago to discuss street epistemology, and who I think wrote the introduction to the third edition. If I am
yep, he did the foreword, and I was very pleased, and he was very magnanimous. I approached him. He didn't know me from Adam. I sent him a copy of the book, and he says, Todd, this sounds like something that I could get in on, and he's been a prince. So I owe him a lot. I owe you a lot for having me on this program. This is therapy for me. In this day and age where you see what happens with what people are capable of, January 6th or whatever it is, when I can talk with somebody who obviously uses reason, logic, and is empathetic, it gives me, I hate to use the word, faith in humanity.
It's any consolation. It was, in time, has had its ups and downs. At one point was actually doing extraordinarily well. Recently, it hasn't been, certainly, it's been in the red for quite some time. It's therapy for me. That's why I'm here. So thank you, sir, for coming. All right.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, so we'll catch up with you again. Again, the name of the book is, and you know what? I wanted to, why don't you hold the book up again, actually, because we've got, so people can see what to look for on Amazon, because you did hold it up. There you go. And I did have...
Final pattern.
All right. I think I keep...
Please look for the second edition. So the second edition is much tighter than the first.
I've been, and I've been mistaking the tagline for the title. So I'll try not to make that mistake again, because I like the tagline. But people do the same thing with Hitchens, too. How Religion Poisons Everything. That wasn't the name of the book, but okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. And we will see you all tomorrow if Joe hasn't. Oh, God, I don't even want to talk about what's going to happen with Joe tomorrow night. And we will, and then COVID on Thursday, and then on Friday, our regular call-in show, Hang. If you've gotten this far, please like and subscribe. We will see you all tomorrow. Thank you, Doctor.